everyone. I'm Samir Bakhru. I'm a partner in our technology companies group based out of New York City. Today, I'm here with our good friend and colleague, Sujay Tyle, who's the CEO of Merama. Thank you for being here today and listening in. So Sujay, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I know you very well, but please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thanks so much for having me. I am Sujay Tyle. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Merama. And formerly, as you know, I was the CEO and founder of a company called Frontier Car Group, where Orrick and Samir represented us as well. At Merama, we are trying to create the next generation of online e-commerce brands in Latin America, actually. And so we do have an office and operation in the United States. However, our business is focused primarily on creating digital brands that sell throughout Latin America, which is a region going through an e-commerce renaissance that we're hopefully trying to capture a lot of value in. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Sujay. So what drove you to start your next company in Latin America? I mean, you've been all over the world, started companies everywhere. What's Merama's mission and what led you to where the company is at today?
Yeah, I think I've always been obsessed with emerging markets, period. And that's not unique to Latin America. It's globally. And the last business I started, we had operations in Southeast Asia, we had operations throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and we had operations in Latin America. And I fell in love with the region of Latin America, particularly. It is the fastest growing e-commerce market in the entire world. It is the fastest growing internet penetration market in the entire world, fastest growing credit card penetration in the world. And I think when you put a lot of that together and you can bring the right capital to the region and the right talent to the region, you can really create extraordinary value, and you can make a big difference in the region. And so, for this next business, I knew I was going to focus only on Latin America rather than all over the world, and hopefully bring the right investors and the right tech and the right talent, and be able to, ride a wave that was already growing.
Amazing. Now, you've done this several times over in many emerging markets. And so one question I have for you that goes out there to all startup founders that are as obsessed with emerging markets as you are, what do startup founders that are focused on emerging markets need to succeed in one word?
In one word, I think that they need trust is the biggest thing. And I use trust, and it's probably a little bit of a cheating because it's trying to be succinct with one word, but trust is a very flexible word in this sense where trust externally, first of all, with stakeholders and with board members and with advisors, et cetera. And what I mean by that is if you talk to investors, and you probably know this better than anyone, is one of their biggest fears when they invest in a country like, my last company in Nigeria or this company in Mexico, even the opaque labor laws, the opaque corporate structures, and how can their capital be protected? How can they ensure that there's no corruption in the company, whatever. And so that is a barrier you have to navigate. And if you can create that trust through different mechanisms, and we can talk about them, that helps tremendously bring those stakeholders into the business. And then internally with employees, how do you make sure that you create a culture of work that almost resembles Silicon Valley or New York, where they can be working on innovative stuff, ensure that they'll get paid, ensure that they have real stock in the company, because there's been lots of horror stories in emerging markets. And then finally, the third leg is to customers. How can you create a spirit of a company where customers know or suppliers know they'll get compensated and customers will have a great journey using your product. And so I think that there's a much higher barrier of trust internally, externally, and with customers that emerging markets companies have to think about. But if you can do that right, it's a big competitive advantage as well.
Amazing. So as you think about building trust and you think about navigating these really difficult waters as you build these companies in emerging markets, what is some of the best advice you've received from any legal team member that has helped your company, Merama, succeed?
It's actually probably a piece of advice you gave me back in the day and that's what we've used for both Frontier and Merama is, and I don't know if it's a piece of advice that's universally true, to be very honest, but something that's worked extraordinarily well for us is being a Delaware company. And I know that sounds kind of funny, But and there are lots of other great pieces of advice, don't get me wrong, but this is one that just always comes to my head because I have to talk about it a lot, is people always find it weird that we have very minimal US presence in this company and the last one. We've always maintained being a Delaware C Corp. And what's allowed us to basically create that trust on the investor side, which frankly, we don't build a company for investors, but unfortunately in this world, investors unlock the ability to create value for employees and customers. And so you have to kind of build a company a little bit around them in the beginning. And that has created so much of that trust and transparency and ease for investors and eventually for employees, because they have a very transparent stock plan. Investors have a very strong corporate structure to invest within. There's very strong anti-corruption laws. And so, just that one decision, while tax-wise, it may not, it may be a plus or minus 5% swing compared to other geographies, who knows? It has been a tremendous amount of power for us, and something that's unlocked great value for us too.
I have to say, I really admire kind of the long-term view that you take on things, especially as you talk about, tax swings and whatnot, and what sets you guys up to succeed over the long haul. Kind of thinking and taking that view with the way you approach investors and markets is really nice to see. And on that point, it's tough to be a startup founder in this. I lost count. This must be your third or fourth foray at it. Yeah. So what do you love about what you do? And what motivates you to keep going every single time? You have a successful exit. Now you go start another company and try a new challenge.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the nice words. I think that, it's only my second time as CEO. I was the CEO of my last company and this one. And, I think that when you're especially dealing with emerging markets, I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs will say, creating value or seeing a smile on the customer's face. And that's fine. That's obviously an amazing thing. And I like that too. I think that actually is of a totally different world when you can think about emerging markets, because in emerging markets, the beauty is that you can disrupt fundamental industries or massive categories, because they're so nascent in these places. And so what Peloton did in the United States, or what Warby Parker did in the United States, that created, or Uber did, they created almost a fundamental shift on how somebody does something in their life. That's big. If you look at the coolest companies coming out of the United States today, there are fundamental ones that are changing consumer behavior, but sometimes they're operating within niches and they can still be big businesses. But what I like is thinking about almost where the US disrupted 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and doing that for massive countries. And I think when you do that, you can kind of fundamentally shift an industry rather than just, something niche. And that's really cool to me, is, the used car trade in many countries has fundamentally shifted because of my last company. The way people buy certain products online has fundamentally shifted in Latin America because of Merama. And that's really exciting.
I can see that. And to kind of add to that, as you've sort of built each of these companies and taken them from idea stage to executing on them in the real world, what surprised you the most on that journey?
I think that it's very, I think a lot of people very naively think when it comes to emerging markets, and that has led to a lot of failure, frankly, is that it's kind of a one size fits all approach. And, where Latin America is Latin America and it's just a blob, Africa is a blob, and Asia or Southeast Asia or South Asia is a blob. And, the first naive thinking is basically anything that is created in the US can just be exported and automatically work. And then the second naive thinking, if that doesn't work, is that anything that works in Latin America just works everywhere in Latin America or Africa or in Asia. I think fundamentally what you see is that all of these places are so different culturally, legally, language-wise, currency-wise, everything, consumer behavior, consumer ability to pay. And so, I think that in our first company, we try to create common tech platforms and common ways of doing business. And what we quickly realized is that we have to adapt all of these businesses very, very, very locally. And so I think the biggest change is initially we brought in a lot of talent from the United States or a lot of talent from Europe to run these companies. But eventually what we've seen is that the only way to make companies succeed is to have the best talent locally paired with the best capital internationally. I think that that's been a really big surprise, but it's, I think realizing that early has allowed us to have an unfair advantage in these places, and have, teams leading these businesses who fundamentally understand that country. That's been a really big surprise, but hopefully we're on the right side of that surprise now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being nuanced about each one of those markets is certainly really wise, and I can see how that would lead to a lot of success for Merama. Touching on that even more, why is it an exciting time to be in your industry and in your space specifically?
Well, I think number one is that probably three things, right? So one, Latin America, and I think you open TechCrunch like over the past 18 months and refresh the screen and like a new Latin American company has raised money. Like, I just think that we got so lucky, to be honest, where Latin America has become like the hottest region of the world of focus for employees and customers and investors, where we've gotten to kind of ride a tidal wave. E-commerce in particular, number two, e-commerce is almost like a confluence of a lot of trends that happen, right? Like when people get credit cards, when logistics become more efficient and safer, when people trust transactions online, when Amazon expands to new countries and Mercado Libre and Shopee and this and that, there's so many companies that, can operate in each of these categories, but e-commerce is almost like a whirlpool in between. It relies on fintech, it relies on logistics, it relies on credit card penetration, it relies on supply chain optimization. And so e-commerce kind of wins when all of these trends win. And so over the past like 5 or 7 years, companies have been being built on fintech, supply chain, logistics, whatever. And now is this renaissance for e-commerce as a result. And so you look at the third trend, which is basically that there's not a single billion-dollar brand that exists in Latin America today that sells primarily online. There's going to be $170 billion of sales this year. It is the fastest growing e-commerce region in the entire world with not a single billion-dollar brand within there. And that's unheard of. In every single other region in the world where this has happened, there has been a billion-dollar brand created within the first 3 years. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I think for all of those three reasons, I think that we got very lucky and we're in the right place at the right time, hopefully.
And lastly, Sujay, perhaps the question I'm most excited to ask you about, given that you've started multiple emerging market companies and where you operate, what's your advice to other tech founders on taking the right risks?
Yeah, I think that it's succinctly, I think that entrepreneurship being such a big risk is an overblown proposition. I actually don't think it very much is. It's a risk, don't get me wrong, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. But number one, you can kind of tranche your data points and the amount of risk you take until it's validated and validated. You see a problem, validate it with 1 or 2 data points, raise a bit of money, validate it with 10 to 15 data points, raise more money, et cetera, et cetera. So you're not taking as much capital risk in the beginning as people think. And number two is that with the power of entrepreneurship these days, honestly, and like how successful entrepreneurs have been and people realizing the time and effort it takes, there's opportunities to always have an amazing opportunity outside of entrepreneurship if you so decide after that path. So my advice is take the risk because it's not as big of a risk as people think it is.
Thank you, Sujay. We really appreciate you being here today and chatting with us, and we look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, everybody.